Hello and welcome to this episode of Parity's Regulatory Rewind. We are in the 14th episode of this kind, where the legal team of Parity provides you with regulatory news from all around the globe. Please, as always, I would like to remind you that we are lawyers, but we're not your lawyers. So this is not legal advice. This is just expressing our personal views on the news that we found online. We also invite you to send us questions relating to the stuff that we present or other stuff that's associated with it. And we are happy to share our thoughts in these regards. So welcome. And I first want to give over to Eva, who has some substantial news from the UK coming up. Eva.
Hi, thank you, Gustav, and hi, everyone. Well, after last week's dulcet tones of the US with our special guest stars in Reg Rewind last week, this week we are in the UK. The UK, it's been long awaited and highly anticipated on many fronts. The UK has finally drafted and published its legislation on how it is planning to regulate digital assets. Now, I think it's always important to note that a lot of big announcements happen at conferences. And last week we had Token 2049. And we also in the UK we had the UK FinTech Week. And part of UK FinTech Week was Innovate Finance Global Summit. So last week, this keynote speech was used by Rachel Rees, the UK's Chancellor of the Exchequer, to announce the 27-page draft document on how the UK plans to amend its existing financial services legislation to bring into scope crypto assets. Now, this is it's nothing particularly radical. This has been in play for quite some time. The consultation for this that led to this draft legislation was actually February 2023 under a Conservative government. I think at the time it was still Rishi Sunak. Parity and the Web3 Foundation actually submitted some responses to that, because it was at a level where a blockchain a blockchain foundation and a blockchain developer had some substantive comments to make about utility tokens and regulating the use, not the tokens themselves. So that was our submission in 2023. And as most of you know, in 2023, there was quite a lot of governmental changes in the UK, which meant that we didn't actually have a new Labour government until 2024, who then proceeded to confirm the intention to regulate digital assets in line with the previous government's consultation outcome, which then has finally led to this draft legislation announced just last week. And we have until the 23rd of May to provide feedback on this draft legislation. And as a whole, I would say it is the kind of same risk, same regulation approach that the UK has taken. And whilst it's good to get the regulation itself, and it would boost innovation and the industry in the UK, it doesn't necessarily go as far as other countries globally, which is something that we have been commenting on. However, it is also slightly different to other approaches in other parts of the world. So the UK Treasury publishes the legislation, and it is then up to the FCA, which will be both implementing and enforcing the legislation. So the FCA is the regulator, and I will pass it over to Jamil to talk a little bit about what the FCA has done following this announcement from the UK Treasury.
Thanks, Eva. So shortly after the HM Treasury published the proposed legislation, the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, they followed up actually with a discussion paper on the topic of this proposed legislation. And from this, they are essentially seeking feedback on the proposed regulations ahead of the planned 2026 rollout. The FCA's discussion paper addresses areas such as trading platforms, intermediaries, lending, staking, and decentralized finance. And it also considers restrictions on using borrowed funds for crypto investments, with the aim of enhancing consumer protection and market integrity, according to the FCA. And in its press release, it emphasizes the need for clear regulations to support innovation while safeguarding consumers. And as part of this, there is going to be a consultation period, which is open until June the 13th, 2025. Related to this, the FCA has published plans to prohibit retail investors from using borrowed funds, including credit cards, to purchase cryptocurrencies. And the move aims to protect consumers from unsustainable debt, especially given the volatile nature of crypto assets. The authority is also considering stricter rules for crypto services targeting retail investors, such as separating proprietary trading from client activities and enhancing transparencies. So all of this falls under the kind of broader proposals to regulate the crypto market, as Eva kind of just outlined in her segment. I think for the FCA, it will be an interesting kind of balance, and quite a difficult balance, between consumer protection against innovation and competitiveness, especially as the UK aims to strengthen its position in this sector on the global stage. So it remains to be seen how exactly that plays out once the legislation moves from draft phase into the following phases and eventually implementation by the FCA. And with that, back over to Eva for some industry reactions to the draft legislation.
Thank you, Jamil. That's right. So the FCA is a little bit like the equivalent of the SEC in the US, and the response so far, we've been sort of looking. It was announced on Monday, so not Monday. It was announced last week, so we've been looking through some of the responses and some big names that you might recognize. So Revolut has welcomed the crypto rules, even though they're onerous. And I think one of the comments that we have noted is that the rules, which look more like what the US is doing than what the EU approach has been, which is a comprehensive MiCA framework. The UK has taken the approach to rewrite some of the existing laws. It is seen that this might favor companies that already operate in heavily regulated environments. So in that sense, it's more complex and onerous than MiCA. And in that sense, it also means that market players with less experience of operating in a heavily regulated environment might be at a disadvantage because they have to do more in order to work in the UK. So crypto native companies or startups might have a harder time getting up to speed with the regulations and operating within them. Other companies such as Ripple and Zodia have also welcomed the clarity, but criticized the speed of implementation. So there's a few things in the UK legislation that I think are interesting to flag, because I think Jimmy already mentioned truly decentralized finance is excluded. So it is unclear what the meaning of decentralized would be and how companies might fall within that or might not fall within that. There is some interesting registration requirements around staking services, which again, some companies might find it easier to comply with and others less so. There's also going to be the enforcement of the financial promotion rules, which are going to be interesting because it caused a little bit of a scare originally when they first came out around what would be considered a financial promotion. Wearing a t-shirt at a conference, would that be considered financial promotion? Doing podcasts, would those be considered financial promotions? So there are some interesting things to look out for when the time comes to when more information becomes available. One of the other things that I mentioned was the response from the US. So the UK's delayed regulation hurts plan to be global crypto hub, executives say to CNBC. That's a very generic statement made by a number of industry leaders to a news site. So it somehow seems to be that the UK is perceived to be slow. I think there has been that accusation is perhaps correct, because we were originally in the days of where Rishi Sunak was promising crypto hub, and now we're at a stage where a few years later there's finally some draft legislation. And has it been something that can push the UK forward as an innovation hub compared to other countries? It's yet to be seen. It is not revolutionary. There are some things that we would say could potentially be seen to be beneficial to US companies. And this aligns with some of the observations made in the press that there is a UK transatlantic strategy that consists of the UK and the US working together, collaborating together, and that involves the Chancellor of the Exchequer speaking to Scott Bessant in the US, in DC last month. And there's going to be a UK and US financial regulatory working group next month around cross-border innovation. And in the drafts themselves, there is a exemption for overseas stablecoin issuers from the regulations. So that means non-UK stablecoin providers can operate without setting up a local operation and securing UK regulatory approval. So there are nuances to this, but that is one thing that has been noted. Another thing is that there are some other exemptions which might apply to other foreign crypto entities, depending on their activity and whether the engagement is with institutions or with UK consumers. So that is some commentary on the US, whether or not the UK strategy is getting closer to the US or not. And I think there was a comment that was made in the EU about the UK's strategic alignment with the US that I think Gustav might have a view on or can share with us.
Yes, in this regard, I would like to mention that the governor of the Bank of France warned that the US support of cryptocurrency could lead into financial instability, and he criticizes the approach of the American administration to encourage crypto assets and non-bank finance, and suggests that this is going to be potentially detrimental for the future. And he highlights that the European more secure oversight of crypto industry and the need for Europe to attract international investors is a different approach than the US. And also, meanwhile, the European Central Bank is launching an innovation hub with 70 participants, including firms like Accenture and KPMG, to test a digital euro project, and they aim to explore payment functionalities and use cases of the central bank digital currency. So Europe continues to go a different path, and basically are seeing the US as critical and are not following as the UK does. And with that, back to Eva on how the UK is probably also not following the US lead.
Well, in some ways, people are saying the UK is following the US lead. So, I mean, the contrast there, based on what Gustav was saying, the CBDCs in Europe is something that is being explored through the digital euro. In the UK, there is still some exploration around the digital pound. In the US, the CBDC has been ruled out. In the UK, the announcement this week, which diverges from the US, is that I think it was yesterday, actually, at the FT Digital Finance, Digital Assets Summit, there was an announcement by the UK's Economic Secretary saying that there will definitely not be the launch of a UK national crypto reserve, which is, again, in contrast to the US. So it's not necessarily the case that the UK is entirely following the US's approach, but there are some divergences and some other areas where there isn't divergence. I'm going to hand over to Jamil now on some reflections around, from the UK perspective, with the divergence point.
Thanks, Eva. I think that's quite right in terms of there being divergence in certain aspects between the UK and the US. I think in one sense, the UK approach is looking quite a bit closer to the US and SEC approach in the last few years, at least, than it is to the EU's approach with MiCA. I would kind of analogize this to EVs, and when the initial kind of Tesla Roadster came out, I think in the early 2010s, this was based on a kind of chassis from an existing combustion engine car. And the real strides in Tesla and other kind of EVs that we've seen in the last few years actually came when they built bespoke EV platforms from the ground up, which were obviously a lot more performant and were a lot more future-proofed. It took longer to get there than kind of simply repurposing the existing platforms of existing kind of ICE cars and shoehorning electric motors into that. But the results were quite astonishing once they did, and especially more performant than what was being done initially. So I think the EU approach can be said to be quite a bit more bespoke like that, like building an EV from the ground up. And the UK and US approach kind of shoehorns the new technology of crypto and digital assets into the existing TradFi regulations, which we've had for, decades at this point. And the results really remain to be seen. It may be that the UK and the US approach is more favorable than the EU's one, or it may be that the EU's one is significantly more suitable to digital assets and the crypto space. Maybe MiCA ends up, once it's tinkered with, being something really quite good for the EU and the crypto space. But again, that kind of remains to be seen. It's definitely a different approach in the EU than the UK. I know Eva mentioned the point about the UK being quite slow. I think to me it's interesting that the UK, yes, this draft legislation has some promising things about it, but it's taken a long time to get here just to the stage of draft legislation. Meanwhile, in the EU, MiCA was published, which is a kind of, like I said, built from the ground up bespoke legislation, and that was done quite a bit before the UK got to this point. So I have some kind of reflections on that. I guess almost a decade on from Brexit, this is the most kind of significant example in the digital asset space, in the crypto space, of the UK being able to use its post-Brexit independence from the EU. And it remains to be seen what the results of that are. It may be that a few years down the line, we in the UK might be thinking, oh, if only we were still in the EU and we could have maybe harmonized MiCA into UK law. Or it may be that we're happy to have the post-Brexit independence, and what this draft legislation is develops into something that's significantly more suitable for the digital asset space than what we have in the EU with MiCA. So, none of us really have a crystal ball. We'll kind of see how this plays out. But I just thought that's an interesting contrast on this. And with that, over to Gustav for some more analysis on this.
Thank you, Jamal. So I would like to use the opportunity, because we are talking so much about the MiCA as well, to compare, or to at least in a few points compare how the UK is approaching stuff in comparison to the MiCA. So first of all, and that's probably quite crucial, is the application of the draft. So it is a UK solution that is proposed. So of course it's applicable only in the UK. So it's lacking what the upside of the MiCA actually is, that you could passport any license to a different country. That is not possible, of course, in the UK. Another thing that is, I think, quite substantial is the stable coins. In the MiCA, we had the problem that stable coins were regulated with backing of 100% reserve, which basically killed quite a few stable coins on the European market. So they got delisted on exchanges for European consumers. The UK regulation also requires backing of assets, but at least not yet. They don't have a percentage minimum that is required. Then I would like to shed light on the DeFi approach. So the UK regulation, Eva mentioned it already, but I really want to highlight that, has no special provision on DeFi. So the requirements are probably not applicable if they are in a truly decentralized protocol, but there's no real regulation about it, and the FCA will decide on a case-by-case basis, while in the EU, the MiCA regulates explicitly that decentralized services that are acting without an intermediary are exempt from the regulation. And last but not least, I would like to talk about lending and borrowing. That is out of scope in MiCA, but it's explicitly included in the UK draft. So there's dealing as a principle, which is covering lending and borrowing with your own capital, and arranging deal that would cover operating crypto assets through lending platforms. So that was a try to give you an overview about the differences and similarities between those two regulations. And with this, I would go over to Europe, to myself, and continue to talk about what's going on in Europe. So the two biggest news are the anonymous crypto accounts and privacy coins, and the GDPR guidelines that were published last week. Both are quite substantial. So the EU is about to ban anonymous crypto accounts and privacy coins by 2027. This is part of an extensive anti-money laundering regulation, and it will ban privacy-focused currencies like Monero Cash, but also will hinder banks or CASPs or other financial institutions from offering anonymous accounts or handling these coins. That is interesting because we have AML rules in those institutions already, and one would think that this is enough, but now they're extending it to the accounts and to special coins. In essence, that will probably mean that people will still have anonymous crypto accounts that they're holding themselves, but whenever they interact with one of these service providers, it might be that they have to go through additional anti-money laundering processes. And also the EU wants to increase oversights over CASPs by directly supervising at least 40 entities in 2027. The next thing I want to talk about is the GDPR guidelines on processing personal data through blockchain technology. That is going to significantly impact public permissionless blockchains, or real blockchains, as I like to call them. So blockchains that are not handled by entities or privately, but that are really using the technology to publicly, permissionlessly have interactions between end users. Why is that relevant? The GDPR regulates how personal data is treated in any kind of data bank that you might have, and they see a blockchain as a data bank, so they would have to comply with the GDPR rules that offer significant rights to the people who are whose data is being treated in there, which is a good thing. But the critique that I would have is that the GDPR rules and blockchains were developed at the same point of time, and they were made with the same effort to preserve privacy for its users. They just had different solutions. So GDPR is a regulation, so it gives users rights, and it gives structures that have to be implemented in entities, while blockchains, on the other side, are providing that on a technological level, so you can handle your own data, and this data is protected as such with the technology provided. And that doesn't fit. And the problem about the guidelines is that they are pretending to talk about blockchain technology and personal data, while in essence, they're only talking about personal data and making everything personal data that normally lives on a blockchain, even if it's not really personal. I'm too long, sorry.
No, that's, I mean, I think this is really quite scary stuff. Like that LinkedIn post literally says, deleting entire blockchains for GDPR compliance. It's a bit alarmist, but it sounds like this is a fundamental philosophical and legal battle to be had, ideological battle at a EU level almost. And what are the next stages then? Is this a draft? What can people do about it, if anything, other than leave the EU? I mean, what should blockchains, should protocols be doing anything, and should individuals be doing anything?
It's difficult for a decentralized technology to leave an ecosystem, so that's potentially not possible. There is a public consultation phase that is still open. I'm sure everyone who can Google will find it. You can actively participate in the consultation. I think it ends sometime in June, and provide feedback. I think it would be good if a lot of people do that, so that the European authorities see that we do see what they do, and to guide them in creating guidelines that are fitting better for what they actually want to achieve. I think the guidelines are quite okay if you are a project who's looking how to store your data, then that's a good approach. But especially for layer one blockchains, with the impetus that even a hash could become a personal data, I think it's quite impossible to go back and have someone fiddle with the blockchain whenever someone wants something to be deleted. So it's just a completely different approach, and they just don't really fit to each other.
So big news, big regulation and guidelines and news items in the EU and in the UK. Well, I know we're at 27 minutes past, and I think it has been really important to cover off these two very important large pieces of legislative changes that are being proposed. We did have a lot of content for around the world, Asia, Middle East, Africa, and the Americas. But I think we're going to run out of time. I would maybe just pick on Gustav a little bit again. Sorry, Gustav, you've been talking loads. But in terms of election news, I think it's worth commenting on the election news because it has just happened. So the Australia and Canadian election news, and then I can mention the Korean elections, and then we can quickly talk about the US because we're going to be out of time, and we can cover some of the other jurisdictions next week.
Yes. So Australia has voted and has re-elected a government to prioritize digital asset legislation. The crypto industry is urging the government to prioritize digital asset legislation to keep pace with the market. The Labour government was re-elected on May 3rd with over 50%. And we are interested and looking what's going to happen. The government plans to release a draft legislation for consultation this year, adopting a phase-off approach to minimize business disruptions. In Canada, there's also been an election. Also, the Liberal leader, Mark Carney, who is rather against cryptocurrencies, has won. He's skeptical and favors a central bank digital currency. Same approach as the EU. And we are also looking at what's going to happen there. I don't know, Eva, do you want to go into the Korean election as well?
Yeah, I think we'll only really be able to do geopolitics this time, as opposed to all the other industry news that's been happening in Asia and around the world. So I was going to cover some interesting stories in Bhutan, Indonesia, and Malaysia, but I will just skip to South Korea, where we previously talked about, I'm not even going to talk about the changes in the laws, but I'm going to talk about the elections because that is important and it's happening fairly soon. So I think for the first time in maybe ever, I have to verify that, but this is the first time I've heard of an election where both leading candidates are talking about their crypto policies. And one of them, the leading candidate, is the most likely one to win at the moment, based on polls, has talked about spot ETFs, which is a very specific campaign promise or campaign promise to make. So I think that is probably going to be us for this week. But to say that we do have a lot of news that we will cover next week instead. And Jamil and Gustav, and of course we can't go without saying that the US has published its draft legislation market structure bill on Monday, and there has been a little bit of drama around that. This is the one that is based around or has an improved Fit 21, which we've been talking about for ages. So we'll cover that off next week, along with the around the world news, that roundup that we did for this week, but we were unable to finish off because the UK legislation and the EU updates on privacy were just so interesting. So I would just say thank you, Jamil, and thank you, Gustav, and thank you everyone for listening. Hopefully see you next week.
Oh.